The last voice I expected to whisper those words to me was hers. Not a friend, not a stranger, not someone lonely at a bar after too much wine. My boss, Natalie Holt. The most composed woman in Nashville's financial district. The woman who walked through boardrooms like she owned oxygen. The woman who never once in 4 years blurred a single professional line. And yet she sat in the passenger seat of my car on a quiet Thursday evening in Green Hills, staring at her hands, and whispered, "Be my husband. I need to tell you how we got there." The morning after my divorce, I parked in the Caldwell and Morris garage on Charlotte Avenue and stayed inside my car for 11 minutes. I counted them. I watched the concrete wall in front of me like it might explain something. My wedding ring was gone. My finger felt wrong. Empty. Like I had misplaced something important, and my body had not caught up yet. 9 years ended in 15 minutes. Brooke did not cry. That was the part that kept replaying in my head. She signed the papers like she was confirming a delivery. Clean, quick, efficient. The man she met in Atlanta 8 months earlier had 3 properties and a corner office. She said it was not about comparison. It is always about comparison. I took the elevator to the 14th floor because staying home felt like drowning. Natalie was already at her desk. She was always already at her desk. In 4 years, I had never beaten her into the office. When I walked past her doorway, she looked up. Her eyes dropped to my left hand for half a second. Something shifted in her expression. Then the composure returned like a vault door closing. "Daniel," she said, "come in." She closed the door behind me. I expected a portfolio update or a correction on the Huxley report. Instead, she looked directly at my bare finger. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I had not told anyone at the office. Not even Jenna. The fact that she noticed cracked something open inside my chest. It was small. Not hope, but not nothing either. The weeks after divorce do not break you all at once. They break you in small, private ways. The first time you cook for one and almost grab 2 plates. The first Saturday morning when there is no plan. The first night you reach across the bed and find nothing but cold sheets. My apartment on Belmont Boulevard smelled like fresh paint and loneliness. I kept the television on mute because the sound of other people's laughter felt cruel. But every morning I had the 14th floor. And every morning, without saying a word about my divorce, Natalie gave me harder work. Not as punishment, as purpose. 3 days after the divorce, she reassigned my portfolio and handed me the Meridian account. The most complex file in the building. The kind of account senior partners usually guarded. When I looked up from the folder, she was standing in my doorway. "You think better when you're challenged," she said. "Do not waste the capacity." Then she walked away. I stayed until 9 that night. When I drove home, the silence in my apartment felt slightly less heavy. 6 weeks later, Natalie did not come into work. In 4 years, that had never happened. Not during the ice storm. Not when she lost her voice to bronchitis. The floor felt off balance. Jenna looked unsettled. Natalie returned the next morning as precise as ever. But I noticed small changes. A pause before standing. A brief stillness in the elevator one afternoon. She pressed her palm flat against the steel wall and closed her eyes for a slow breath. She thought no one saw. I saw. 3 weeks later, at 9:17 on a Wednesday night, she walked into my office with 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me. "My mother died alone," she said. I stopped typing. "She had people," Natalie continued evenly, "but she died without someone who chose her specifically." She stared into her coffee. "I have been thinking about that." She left at 9:34. I sat there long after her heels faded down the corridor, looking at the Nashville skyline through the glass. That Thursday morning, she told me about the cancer. She stood by the window, not sitting down, watching the city move below us. "Early stage," she said, "diagnosed in January." She had handled it alone. Appointments scheduled, treatment planned, calendar blocked with precision. "What I do not have," she said calmly, "is someone to drive me home after the infusion." The clinic advised against driving herself. She turned to face me. "I'm telling you because I trust your discretion, not to make this your problem." I did not hesitate. "I will drive you." There were 7 seconds of silence. "Yes," she said finally. I drove her that Thursday. I waited 4 hours in a chair that felt designed to punish patience. I read a financial report I already knew by heart. Somewhere down the hall, the strongest woman I knew sat alone in a treatment chair. I drove her home. She slept most of the way. Her hand trembled slightly against the window from the medication. Not fear, effort. I drove her every Thursday for 5 weeks. On the 5th Thursday, she did not open the door when we reached her house. The engine ticked in the cooling evening air. The neighborhood was quiet. She looked down at her hands. "Be my husband," she whispered. My heart stopped. "Not romantically," she added quickly. "Not like that." She explained. She meant someone who showed up on purpose. Someone who chose to be present. Not because a contract required it. Not because of optics. But because they decided to stay. She had built a company. Managed 7 employees. Engineered her survival. But she had no one who belonged to her in the quiet spaces. Finally, she looked at me. Her eyes were clear and exhausted at the same time. Strong and fragile in one breath. I walked her to her door that night without answering. I drove home through Nashville in a silence that felt different from the silence I had lived with for months. This silence had weight. Direction. The next morning, I called her. "When you said not romantically," I asked carefully, "did you mean that completely?" 7 seconds. "Both," she said. "Possibly." What followed was not dramatic. No rooftop declarations, no grand gestures. They were long conversations in her kitchen on Sunday mornings. Green tea steaming between us, light coming through the windows, honest talks about boundaries and ethics and risk. There were walks along the Cumberland River while her treatment continued. The Tennessee air growing warmer. The city moving around us. There were arguments. Careful discussions about power imbalance and workplace lines. Her cancer responded to treatment. In August, her oncologist used the word encouraging. In the Vanderbilt Medical Center parking lot, Natalie pressed her fingers to her eyes and shook silently for 45 seconds. I stood beside her and said nothing. Some moments do not need fixing. They need witness. The following spring, we married at a vineyard outside Franklin. Small ceremony. Late afternoon light. Jenna cried from the first step down the aisle to the final prayer. When Natalie walked toward me, she did not look like a CEO. She looked like a woman who had carried everything alone for a long time and had finally chosen to set some of it down. Marriage to Natalie is not simple. She sends calendar invites for serious conversations. She reads reports at breakfast, but she calls me first. When scan results come back, when a difficult meeting ends, when she opens the bottom drawer of her desk and looks at her mother's photograph on a hard afternoon, she calls me first. I walked out of that courthouse believing the best of my life was behind me. I was wrong. The most broken version of me stepped onto a 14th floor with a bare finger and hollow eyes. And the woman who ran that floor saw something worth saving before I believed there was anything left. She whispered 3 words that should have ended everything. Instead, they became the beginning of the only story that ever truly mattered. When Natalie whispered those words in my car, I did not answer her that night because I knew whatever I said would change everything. I went home and sat on the edge of my bed in my apartment on Belmont Boulevard, staring at the wall the way I had stared at the parking garage weeks earlier. But this time I was not empty. I was unsettled. There is a difference. Empty feels like nothing. Unsettled feels like something is trying to begin. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching traffic move down the street. For the first time since the divorce, my mind was not replaying Brooke's steady signature on those papers. It was replaying Natalie's voice in my car. Calm. Controlled. But underneath it, something raw. Be my husband. Not romantically. Possibly both. At the office, I kept everything normal. I greeted Jenna. I reviewed numbers. I stepped into meetings like I had for years. Natalie did the same. She wore a navy blazer and walked into the conference room like nothing in her world had shifted. But when our eyes met across the table, there was awareness there. a quiet current under the surface. That afternoon, she sent me a calendar invite. Subject line, Sunday, 10 a.m. Location, my kitchen. No explanation. I stared at the screen for a long moment before clicking accept. Sunday morning, I drove to her house in Green Hills with my hands tight on the steering wheel. The neighborhood was quiet and clean in a way that made everything look stable. Her home was modern, white brick, tall windows, carefully kept landscaping. The kind of house that looked like it had no chaos inside. She opened the door herself. No blazer. No heels. Just a soft gray sweater and her hair pulled back loosely. She looked smaller somehow. Not weaker, just more human. "Come in, Daniel," she said. Her kitchen smelled like green tea and something warm from the oven. Sunlight came through the windows and landed across the marble counters. We sat at her kitchen island like two people negotiating something fragile. "I need to clarify what I meant," she began. Her voice was steady, but her fingers were wrapped tight around her mug. "I do not need a performance," she said. "I do not need appearances. I need someone who chooses to stay present, through treatment, through uncertainty, through the parts of life that are not impressive." She looked at me directly. "I am very good at being alone. That is not the same as wanting to be." I felt that sentence in my chest. "You are asking me for partnership," I said slowly. "Not rescue." "Yes," quote, "and not obligation." "Yes." "And you understand the position we are in professionally." A faint smile touched her mouth. "I understand risk better than anyone in this city." We talked for 2 hours. About ethics, about disclosure, about what it would mean for the firm, about how it would look, about how it would feel. At one point she stood by the window staring out at the yard. "My mother believed love was distraction," she said quietly. "She believed self-sufficiency was survival." "And what do you believe?" I asked. She was silent for a long time. "I believe survival without connection is just endurance." That was the moment something shifted for me. I did not say yes that Sunday. I did not say no. But I began showing up differently. On Thursdays, I did not just drive her. I stayed after. I made sure she ate something small. I sat with her at the kitchen table while the medication wore off. We did not always talk. Sometimes we just existed in the same space. At the office, we kept boundaries firm. No one could have guessed what was unfolding behind closed doors. But small things changed. She would pause at my desk and ask, "Are you sleeping?" I would answer honestly. I would ask, "How was the scan?" She would answer honestly. One evening in late June, after a long day of meetings, we walked along the Cumberland River. The air was warm and thick with summer. The skyline glowed behind us. "You are still afraid," she said softly as we walked. "Yes," I admitted. "Of me?" "No, of losing something again." She stopped walking. "I am not Brooke," she said. "I know. And you are not the man who walked into that courthouse anymore." That hit harder than I expected, because she was right. The version of me who had sat in that parking garage staring at a concrete wall was not the man standing beside her by the river. "I do not want you out of obligation," she continued. "If you choose this, choose it fully." "And if I do," I asked, "then we build something intentional." A week later, we sat in her living room reviewing a formal disclosure plan for the firm's board. It felt surreal. Like drafting a merger agreement for our own lives. "You prepared a risk assessment," I said, staring at the document. "Of course I did," she replied calmly. I laughed for the first time in months. A real laugh. She looked at me, surprised and pleased. "I missed that," she said quietly. That night I stayed longer than usual. The house was dim. The city outside was quiet. We stood in her kitchen again, the same place where she first clarified her request. "I am not asking for a savior," she said. "I am asking for a partner." I stepped closer. "You understand this is no longer just about logistics," I said. "Yes. And if we do this, it will not be halfway." Her eyes held mine. No fear, just honesty. "I do not do halfway," she said. Something inside me settled. Not because it was safe, but because it was real. I choose this, I said finally. Not because you need me, not because I am lonely, but because when I am with you, I feel seen, and I want to build something that is chosen every day. Her breath caught softly. She did not rush toward me. She did not dramatize it. She stepped forward slowly, placed her hand against my chest, and rested it there like she was confirming I was real. Then, be my husband, she said again, this time without clarification. And this time, the words carried something new. Hope. We did not kiss that night. We stood there, in the quiet kitchen, close enough to feel each other's breath, aware that something larger than fear had just begun. Outside, Nashville moved like it always did. Traffic lights changed. Cars passed. The skyline glowed. Inside that house in Green Hills, two people who had spent years mastering independence were quietly deciding to risk dependence. Not because they were weak, because they were finally strong enough to choose it. Saying yes did not make things easier. It made them real. The following Monday, we stood side by side in the boardroom on the 14th floor and disclosed our relationship to the firm's senior partners. Natalie spoke first. Calm. Direct. Transparent. She outlined the timeline, the safeguards, the restructuring of reporting lines. She had already transferred my oversight to another partner to remove any conflict of interest. There were questions, concerns, raised eyebrows, but no one challenged her authority. They never had. After the meeting, as the room emptied, she exhaled slowly, just once, small, controlled. You were steady, I told her. So were you, she replied. We did not touch, we did not linger, but there was something different now. No secrecy, no tension from hiding. That night, she had her 6th infusion. I drove her home through light rain. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm. She was quieter than usual. You are thinking, I said gently. I am recalculating, she answered. About what? About time. Her treatments were working. The scans were improving. But the word cancer changes your relationship with the future. It makes everything sharper, more immediate. At her house, she did not go inside right away. She stayed seated in the passenger seat. Daniel, she said softly, if this does not end the way we hope, I do not regret choosing you. I reached for her hand. It is going to end the way we hope, I said firmly. She looked at me like she wanted to believe that more than anything. Inside, I made her soup. I moved around her kitchen easily now. I knew where the bowls were. Where she kept the tea, she watched me from the table. You fit here, she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Weeks passed. Her strength returned slowly between treatments. We built routines. Thursday infusions, Sunday mornings in her kitchen, evening walks when she felt strong enough. But we also built something else. Trust. One night in July, we sat on her back patio as the air cooled. The city hummed faintly in the distance. You're still afraid of disappearing, she said quietly. The word hit me hard. After the divorce, I had felt invisible, replaceable, like I had been edited out of someone else's future without warning. Yes, I admitted. She turned toward me. You are not invisible to me. It was not dramatic. It was not emotional. It was simple truth. And it anchored something deep inside me. A week later, we attended a firm event together for the first time as a couple. A charity fundraiser downtown. Black tie, bright lights, conversations layered over music. Natalie moved through the room with the same composure she always had. But now, when she introduced me, there was no professional distance. This is Daniel, she said. My partner. Not employee, not colleague, partner. I watched how people adjusted, how they recalibrated their perception, how quickly the narrative changed. On the drive home, she was quiet. Do you regret it? I asked. Regret what? Making this visible. She looked out at the Nashville skyline. No, she said. I regret every year I thought strength meant isolation. Her treatment ended in early September. The final scan was scheduled for a Thursday morning. We sat in the waiting room together. For once, I did not read. I did not check my phone. I just held her hand. When the doctor came in, he was smiling. "Clear," he said. The word felt unreal. Natalie nodded once, calm, collected. We walked out to the parking garage in silence. And then, halfway to the car, she stopped. Her shoulders shook. No sound, no sobbing, just quiet release. I wrapped my arms around her and held her in that concrete garage while the world moved on around us. After a long moment, she pulled back and wiped her face. "We are not announcing this at work," she said firmly. I laughed softly. Of course not. That evening we sat on her living room floor with takeout containers between us. No fine china, no formal table setting, just relief. "You chose me before you knew the outcome," she said. "Yes. Why?" I thought about that carefully. "Because you saw me at my worst and did not flinch," I said. "Because you gave me purpose when I had none. Because when you asked me to stay, it was not about control. It was about connection." She studied my face like she was memorizing it. "I do not want a temporary husband," she said quietly. "You do not have one." The proposal was not dramatic. It happened 2 months later in her kitchen on a Sunday morning. We were standing at the counter, arguing gently about whether she needed to slow down at work. She insisted she felt strong. I insisted strength did not mean invincible. She set down her mug. "Marry me properly," she said. I blinked. "That sounds less like a question," I said. "It is not," she replied calmly. "I am asking you to make this permanent." I stepped closer. "I thought that is what we were already doing." She shook her head slightly. "No, I want vows. I want something deliberate. I want to stand in front of people and choose you out loud." Her eyes were steady. For a woman who once believed connection was distraction, this was everything. "Yes," I said. She smiled slowly. Not the polished public smile, a private one. We planned a small ceremony in Franklin for the following spring. No grand spectacle, just close friends. Family. A vineyard with late afternoon light. In the months leading up to it, life settled into something steady. We worked, we cooked, we argued about small things. We laughed more often. One evening, as we lay in bed, she traced the line where my wedding ring would sit. "You were wrong about one thing," she said softly. "What?" "You thought the best part of your life had already happened." I turned toward her. And you were only halfway through the story." I pulled her close. For the first time since that courthouse on Charlotte Avenue, I did not feel like something had ended. I felt like something had finally begun. The morning of our wedding, I woke up before the sun. For a moment, I forgot what day it was. I stared at the ceiling in my house on Belmont Boulevard, and then it came back to me slowly. I was getting married again, but this time felt different. The first time I stood at an altar, I was hopeful, young, certain that love alone could carry anything. I did not understand then that love also requires presence, attention, daily choice. With Natalie, there was no fantasy. There was clarity. We married at a vineyard outside Franklin, just as the trees were turning soft shades of gold. The ceremony was small, intentional, exactly how she wanted it. When I arrived, the late afternoon light stretched across the grass like something warm and steady. My brother stood beside me. He did not say much. He just squeezed my shoulder once. "You look calm," he said finally. "I am," I replied, and I was. Not because I was fearless, but because I knew exactly who was walking toward me. When the music began, everyone stood. Natalie appeared at the end of the aisle, and the entire world seemed to slow down. She was not wearing a dramatic gown. It was simple, elegant, clean lines, nothing excessive. She did not look like a CEO. She did not look like the woman who controlled 14 floors of a financial empire. She looked like a woman who had fought for her life, who had carried every burden alone for years, and who had finally decided she did not want to carry them alone anymore. When she reached me, she did not hesitate. She took my hands immediately. The officiant spoke, words about commitment, partnership, endurance. but I barely heard them. When it was time for vows, Natalie went first. "I built a life that looks strong from the outside," she said steadily. "But strength without connection is just isolation in better lighting." There was soft laughter. She looked directly at me. "You showed up when I did not know how to ask. You stayed when it would have been easier to protect yourself. You chose me before you knew how the story would end." Her voice did not shake. "I promised to choose you with the same intention." When it was my turn, I did not look at the crowd. I only looked at her. "I thought I lost the best part of my life," I said. I walked into our office believing I had nothing left worth building. She squeezed my hands. "You saw me anyway. Not as broken, not as temporary, but as someone capable of more." I swallowed. I promised to stay, not out of duty, not out of fear, but because I want to. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and when I kissed her, it was not dramatic or cinematic. It was steady, certain. The reception was small. Jenna cried again. My brother toasted us with a short speech that ended with, he needed someone who could see past his worst day. She needed someone who would not be intimidated by her best one. It was true. That night, after everyone left, Natalie and I stood alone under the vineyard lights. She leaned into me. "We did something reckless," she said softly. "Yes." "Would you do it again?" I smiled. "Every time." Marriage with Natalie is not soft and simple. She still schedules difficult conversations with calendar invites. She still works later than she should. She still reads financial reports at breakfast. But she also leaves her phone on the counter when we walk along the river. She rests her head on my shoulder when the scan results come in. She lets herself cry when the memory of her mother hits unexpectedly. And she calls me first. Not her assistant, not her board, not her doctors. Me. 6 months after our wedding, we sat in the same parking garage at Vanderbilt, where she once stood shaking in silent relief. This time, it was a routine follow-up. Clear again. She exhaled slowly. "I am tired of being brave alone," she said. "You do not have to be," I answered. We drove home in comfortable silence. Sometimes I think back to that courthouse on Charlotte Avenue, to the man staring at a concrete wall with an empty ring finger and hollow eyes. If I could stand beside him now, I would tell him this: "You are not finished. The loss you think defines you is only redirecting you. The woman who will see you is already closer than you realize." Because that is what Natalie did. She saw me on the worst morning of my life. She noticed the absence on my hand without me saying a word. She handed me responsibility instead of pity. She trusted me with her vulnerability when she had never trusted anyone before. She did not save me from divorce. She saved me from disappearing. And I did the same for her. The whisper in my car that night could have been fear. It could have been desperation. Instead, it was courage. Be my husband. 3 words that crossed every line we thought was uncrossable. 3 words that turned 2 people who had mastered independence into 2 people brave enough to choose dependence. Now, years later, when I pull into our driveway in Green Hills after a long day, I still pause sometimes, not because I am lost, but because I remember the man who once sat in silence believing nothing beautiful was left. And then I walk inside. She is usually at the kitchen counter, reviewing something on her tablet. She looks up. There is no performance in her expression, no guarded composure, just recognition, just choice. "Hey," she says softly, and in that single word is everything. I step into the house that used to belong only to her. Now it belongs to us. And every time she reaches for my hand, I am reminded that the most powerful thing my boss ever gave me had nothing to do with business. It was the quiet decision to let someone stay, and I stayed.